Ladies, hi, good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Bienenfeld. I know many of you were in my class before, so it's a pleasure to have everyone, see everyone here.
There'll be more people coming in, but.
What?
I'm just trying to gather the crowd up. I'm telling. Thanks. Oh, it's not a problem. You get Haggada? Right now. You going through Haggada? I don't know. Oh, do we need? No.
It's not necessary, but because we have a lot to do, so, but certainly if you have a Haggada.
They are. Oh, you're like, yeah, I see it. Good classic Ozar. Yeah, happy last day.
Thank you. That's you guys are the best recruiters. Anybody anything else? Well,
Ladies, I think we should begin. I've been asked to share with you some of the insights of Rav Soloveitchik on Pesach. On this holiday, Rav Soloveitchik had a lot to say. I don't know if it's available, but this is the Haggada that his students published. It's called Haggada Shel Pesach, Seder Night, the Exalted Evening. So this is his Haggada, and it contains many of his insights into Pesach and into the Seder. Again, I know that there are many Haggadas that you could purchase, and I'm sure all of them are valuable. And I would, my students know I always recommend. It's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks from tonight is the first Seder, and it's a good idea wherever you'll be for the Seder. It's a good, if you don't prepare for the Seder, which is one of the reasons why the Dresher Rachel has these seminars. The more you prepare for the Seder, the more the Seder will do what it's supposed to do, which is what we want to speak about. If you do not prepare and you just show up, showing up is obviously important, but the experience of the Seder, you will not enjoy that experience at all. It'll just be, you'll go through it, you'll wait for the meal, you'll have the matzah. It'll be very nice, depending upon who else will be there. But if you really want to enjoy a certain spiritual meaning, a spiritual experience of the Seder, then you have to prepare for it. And how do you prepare for the Seder? Well, many ways. One of the ways that people prepare is they have a Haggada. And now, when I grew up, there were no Haggadas in English. They didn't exist. Okay, Baruch Hashem, today you can go to any bookstore and you can get, I don't know, in English you can get 20, 30 different Haggadas, and they all are valuable. And you pick whichever one, whichever one you find meaningful. Of course, my Rebbe is Rav Soloveitchik, so obviously I have a buy. I have many Haggadas at home, but this is the one that I use for the Seder. I don't know if I'd like to think it's still available in print. I don't know. But if you haven't purchased Haggada and you'd like to get one, I would certainly recommend this. But again, any Haggada you get that can help you prepare for the Seder would be extremely valuable. And it's called the Exalted Evening. This is what it looks like. I'm sure and again, and begin studying it. Begin right now. If you buy it or any Haggada, I have my yellow marker. My highlighter, and I highlight all over the place. So when it comes to the Seder, I usually lead the Seder in my family, so I know exactly what I want to say. I have my notes. But even if you're not going to be leading the Seder, wherever you'll be, you should participate. Hopefully whoever leads the Seder should allow you and encourage you to participate. And you can add whatever you want to add. Now, if you have nothing, but if you add something and you participate, that will also, when you're involved, right? When you're engaged in the Seder, then that will again increase the experience. So, don't be shy. Don't be one of the four sons, Sheni de Alisho, sit there and just not say anything. You should ask the questions. Ask. Okay. So what I'd like, Rav Soloveitchik, he gave an extraordinary shiur on different parts of the Seder. And I basically highlighted 10 different aspects of the Seder. So I'd like to see if I can go through it, okay? If we really had time, I could show you various sources, how each of these 10 aspects of the Seder relate to the Haggada and relate to Pesach. But we just, given the time that we have, there are other sessions that you're going to hear. So I'd like to highlight them, and then I'll pause after each one if you have any questions, okay? So the first one is, why does he call it an exalted evening? So Rav Soloveitchik would comment, there were 2 evenings during the year that he felt were shot through with intense spirituality. One was the Seder night. What do you think the other night was? Yom Kippur, correct. Kol Nidre night, he felt, Kol Nidre night, Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre night, that's a very, very inspiring evening. So he felt Kol Nidre night and the Seder night had a lot in common. What do they have in common? He said what they have in common is that if it works, you feel a certain closeness to Hashem that you can rarely experience any other time. Now, Yom Kippur, we don't come to shul or about this is the day, we hear the melodies of Kol Nidre, right, the Chazan and so on, and we're elevated. He said the same thing could happen at the Seder. And again, it depends how you view the Seder. If you view the Seder just as a time, family is there, very nice, and then let's eat. Let's eat. I want to have the matzah, the bar, right? We'll have a very good meal. We're looking forward to the meal and so on, and then we'll sing some songs, the Haggada, wonderful. The kids are having a lot of fun, and that's it. So, okay, maybe when you were a child, that was important. But now we're adults. And he says the same experience that a Jew has on Kol Nidre night, you can attain that experience also at the Seder night. But you have to work at it. So that's what he means when he says that's why he calls the Haggada the exalted evening. Okay? Now, how does that happen? It happens in 2 ways. An exalted. Number one, we do things that night that we wouldn't normally do. For example, the 2 things that we do, we demonstrate freedom, where we actually act it out, is we recline. We recline on the left side. And secondly, we drink 4 glasses of wine. Everyone has to drink grape juice, whatever you like, but you have to drink 4 glasses of wine. This is very unusual. No other yontif and Shabbos has that. You don't have to do this in any other yontif, either Sukkot, whatever. So there are these that we demonstrate. Number 2, the second thing that we do is we tell a story. We tell a story. Now, there are 2 ways of telling the story. You can tell a story in terms of history. Once upon a time, this is what happened. Or you can tell the story and feel a part of it. The way the story at the Seder has to be told is you have to try to put yourself in that story. The mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, Rav Soloveitchik said, it says, L'saper be. What is be? In. You have to be in the story. You have to be in. So when you think about the story, you say, that happened thousands of years ago. I look differently, I dress differently, I talk differently. How can I relate to something that happened a long time ago? You can. You have to think about it. So the evening is exalted in the sense that it is elevated. It's elevated to an incredible, incredible level. So that's number 1. This is a very special night. It's not an ordinary yontif night. I don't want to diminish a regular yontif, regular Shabbos. This is a night like Yom Kippur, like Kol Nidre. That's point number 1. So that means, look, on Erev Just think of Erev Pesach, right? Which is 2 weeks from today. So what Erev Pesach is very, think of Erev Shabbos. What do you do on Erev Shabbos? Well, take a shower, get dressed, and so on. That's about it. Set the table. What do we do on Erev Pesach? All of a sudden, we're burning chametz, right? The mood of the house on Erev Pesach, even though it's only Erev Pesach, it almost seems like Pesach in so many ways. You can't have chametz. You can't even have matzah. You're not allowed to eat after a certain point during the day for fear that it'll ruin your appetite for the Seder. Many people don't know. I mean, obviously you can have fruit, vegetables, but you're not allowed to, even though by the time you finish the story, wherever you'll have the Seder, you're not going to eat. Normally, when when would you eat? Well, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Most people I know in my house, we don't sit down until 10:30, 11 o'clock. That's a little bit late to start the meal. So you should have something to eat, but you're not allowed to have matzah. You're not allowed to have chametz. You're not allowed to have mizonos, anything mizonos made with matzah meal. What can you have on Erev Pesach? You're going to have fruit, you're going to have vegetable, you're going to have a piece of cheese, you're going to have macaroons if you want. But even that, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah says in Shulchan Aruch, don't fill your stomach up with that. You should, at least, what other Erev is like that? Erev Yom Kippur. You see the Rav Soloveitchik makes that Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur is not like a normal Erev Yom Tif. We know what happens on Erev Yom Kippur. You go to shul, big meal, and so. Number two, that's number one. It is an exalted evening. Number two, Rav Soloveitchik said, it is a night of redemption, Geula. What does Geula mean? So here, Rav Soloveitchik, when you think of redemption, what does redemption mean? We're redeemed from Egypt. Well, what does redeem mean? Well, redeem means that we were liberated. No. That's not what it. Obviously, we were liberated. But the word Geula is a technical expression. What does Geula mean? So Rav Soloveitchik says as follows. He gives the following example. He says Geula means, and I don't want to go into the Makoros, but be happy to discuss this with people later. So redemption means, he gives the following example. You know what a pawn shop is? Okay, now let's say I need money. So I go to a pawn shop and I say, look, I need $100. Says, well, okay, give me. So I give the person my watch. He gives me a pawn. What does a pawn mean? A piece of paper, something that says, well, I want the watch back, right? So let's say a month later, I go and I have the pawn and I say, I want my watch back. So I have to give him money plus a little something because he has to, and you know what that's called? Redeeming the pawn. The expression is when I go to a pawn, what am I doing when I redeem the pawn? I am returning the watch to its original owner. So Rav Soloveitchik, the notion of redemption means I return back to who I really am. You follow? In other words, redemption means I discover who I really am. The Jewish people in Egypt thought, remember after Paro dies and the Jewish people begin screaming, they thought they were born slaves. They were always meant to be slaves. That was their self-definition. What did they discover when Moshe arrived? No, that's not who they were. They're not slaves. They've been slaves for a long time, but that's not their self-definition. They are free, liberated people. They return Geula. So what did Geula mean? They returned back to who they were. So the problem, so how can you and I relate to that? Very often, we tend not to be who we really are. We copy what's popular. We copy what's fashionable. We're afraid to look in the mirror and to investigate who am I? I am a unique person. I have unique abilities. There's something special about me. Something about me that no one else has. It's not an ego trip. It's a recognition that I have a special mission, a job to do. I have to return back. Becoming free on Pesach doesn't mean I can do, obviously. It means I have freedom to do whatever I want. But on a deeper level, what the Seder is encouraging us to redeem ourselves, to rediscover who we really are, to look in the mirror and to be proud in a very healthy way, in a very wholesome way about who I am. So the second idea of the Seder is a night of redemption, but understanding redemption the way Rav Soloveitchik understands it. We together? Got it? Okay. Number 3. Now we spoke about this in my class on Monday. It's a night of freedom. Now, what freedom here, again, just to elaborate more what we said about redemption, freedom means on a number of levels. What does it mean to be free? To be free, Rav Soloveitchik says, means the courage to tell the truth, number one, not to be coward and by people, by society, to stand up for what you believe in is right. I don't want to go through all the details, but that's one characteristic of being free. The second characteristic of being free is that I can relate to another person. So a slave was not permitted to get married because a slave is so caught up, so self-absorbed, that they cannot relate to another person. Being free means not being self. Being free means I can understand and relate to another human being. Only a free person could get married. Only a free person has the confidence to say, I can accept you for who you are, and now let's join together in marriage. That's what it means to be free. It's not selfish, it's community. Okay, so that's point number 3. It's a night of freedom. We're not slaves. Okay, the third aspect of freedom, I mentioned it here, is that a free person controls their time. That you're in the driver's seat of what you do with your time. HaChodesh hazeh lachem, going to be Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it is your month. When you get up in the morning, right, you can't, to let time control you and just flow along with the day, right, then you're being a slave. You may be free, but you're being a slave. To be a free person means you're in charge of your day. You will set the schedule for your day. When you get up, this is what I'm going to do today. I'm not going to be pushed along by circumstances. So we recognize freedom. Number 1, I can relate to another person. Number 2, I'm controlled. I have to be in control of my time. And number 3, I'm not afraid of telling the truth. Number 4, Rav Soloveitchik said it's a night of destiny. Now, listen to this. He makes a distinction between destiny and destination. He said when the Jewish people left Egypt, what was their destiny and what was their destination? Who can tell me? What was their destination when they left Egypt? What? Israel. What was their destiny? Their destination when they left Egypt was they were heading towards Eretz Yisrael. But what was their destiny?
God's chosen people. To be in the desert for 40
To be where?
Har Sinai.
Har Sinai. Their destiny was Har Sinai. At the Seder, we're not really concerned with the destination, not to minimize the importance of Eretz Yisrael. But at the Seder, there are 4 levels of redemption, right? And the 4th level is V'lakachti eschem li la'am. When did that happen? That God took us to his people? At Har Sinai. We left Egypt in order to rendezvous with Hashem at Har Sinai and become his people. And that's important. In other words, put another way, which is a rather clever way of putting it, in Egypt we were Avdei Paro, we were slaves to Paro. At Har Sinai, we became servants to Hashem. In fact, one of the reasons, and this is another discussion, one of the reasons Rav Soloveitchik has a whole discussion, why was it necessary for us to be slaves in Egypt for so long? I spoke about this on Monday. What's the reason? I mean, Hashem told Avram, Kiger Yeh Zarachem, that your children will be slaves for many years. Why was that built in to our journey to become God's people? Why was it necessary for us to be slaves? Rav Soloveitchik gives a number of reasons. There was something positive that we derived from the slavery experience, okay? But one of them was it's important to understand the concept of subjugating yourself, submitting yourself to something higher. Now, in Egypt, to do that to a person is forbidden. That's idolatry. To serve another human being in an absolute sense, and Paro is a god and so on, and the deity, that's really idolatry. But the notion of serving, the notion of being an eved is important, because now we transfer that mentality, that mindset to Hashem. You follow? In other words, it's okay. Is this yours?
Yes.
Okay. No problem. Okay. You follow? In other words, so now we're servants. Now we're servants of Hashem. Good. We have to realize that there is a God, and we have to listen to what He says. The idea of heeding, of listening, of obeying a higher authority is something we learned in Egypt. We transferred that to Hashem. So in Egypt, we were servants of Paro. The destiny of the Jewish people was to learn to be Abdei Hashem, to be an Eved Hashem. It just what occurs to me, I paid a shiva call yesterday to an old friend who is 94. He just lost his wife, and a lovely person, a very really a very soft-spoken person here who lives in Yerushalayim. And he would always tell me, he was a gabbai in the shoe, he said, and he would always tell me, he said, he would say to me, all I want to be is an Eved Hashem. I just want to serve Hashem. A lovely, lovely person. He should live on Me'ev Esrei, but that's what a person be. So that's what it means that number 4, the Seder night is a night of destiny, when we committed ourselves to be Abdei Hashem. Number 5, the Seder night is a night of Talmud Torah. Now, just think about it for a second, okay? Rav Soloveitchik said the Seder night is transformed into a classroom. What's the best example of this? The four. Well, you're right. We'll get to that. But the 4 sons. What's the whole idea of the 4 sons? There's Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu Baruch Shenasan Tarli Amo Yisrael. So Rav Soloveitchik would quote one of the early Rishonim. It sounds like a Birchas HaTorah. It sounds like we're saying a bracha over the Torah. Because the Seder night is a night of learning, of Talmud Torah. We learn. So how do we learn? What is, now, again, I wish we had time to look at the Haggada. What's the body of the Haggada? So the first part of the Haggada is the introduction. We have the Kadesh, Urachatz, Karpash, and then we tell the story. What is the story? What is the story? You all know the story, right? Who doesn't know the story? So what are we doing? Why don't we can cut to the chase and have the meal? Everyone knows the Jewish people who were slaves, right? We had a rough time. God took us out. Let's eat, So watch what the Baalei Haggada, the people who composed the Haggada, according to many opinions, where they remember this is the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the great assembly of sages after the destruction of the first temple. They were the ones that composed the Siddur, so they were the original, So what did they do? They took only 4 verses. They took 4 psukim, not from the book of Shemos. They took 4 psukim from the end of Sefer Devarim. We'll get to that, okay? Just 4 verses. How long does it take to say 4 verses? A minute. Arami Oved Aviv, Vayer Mitzrayim, Vayaber Shabbat, the same buttons up. That's 4 verses. But what did they do? After each verse, you take a look at Haggada. After each verse, they cut and paste the medrash on those 4 psukim. The medrash is called the Sifrei, a Tanaitic source. So they took the medrash on the first puzzle, Arami Oved Aviv, and they put it in the Haggada. So you have verse number 1, followed by the medrash. Verse number 2, the medrash. 3, the medrash. You follow? That's the structure of the essence of the Haggada. When you fulfill the mitzvah, why do they do that? Why didn't they just pick the story? Where do you find the story? Not in the book of Devarim. You find the story in the book of Shema. So, we don't, how come we don't do that? And we don't do that. So among the answers is that the Seder night is a night of Torah learning. What is the Medrash? The Medrash is learning what a certain pasuk means. Arami Ovedavi. Well, what does that mean? Oh, so I have the Medrash, like Perush Rashi. And the Medrash, so I'm engaged in learning. And when you learn something, ladies, and you get into it, you're engaged in the story. You're not just telling the story, you're studying the story. And when you study something, it becomes alive. It's not just the past event. Like I said in my class, what do we say when we speak about Rashi? We say Rashi says. He's dead. Why don't we say Rashi said? The Rambam said. We say they say. We use the present tense. Why do we use the present tense? Because when we study them, they become alive. They're meaningful. They say something to me that means something. So the Seder night, number 5, is a night of learning. Number 6, which follows, it's a night of questions. And now, of course, the questions. Look, sukkahs, we do some unusual things, right? We sit in the sukkah. Do we have 4 questions? We don't have 4 questions on sukkahs. We're Rosh Hashanah, we don't, but the Seder night is a night where the Haggada has the famous Manish Tana. Why? What's the idea of questions? And by the way, people say, this is Rav Soloveitchik made this point, it's based on the Gemara, that who asked the 4 questions? They say, well, the children asked them. What happens if there are no kids? You know, who asked the question? And let's say you're a lot of Rav Soloveitchik, who asked the 4 questions? The leader of the Seder. The leader of the Seder, the one who's running the, he asks, or if it's a woman, they ask the 4 questions. So what does that tell you? The 4 questions is not something for kids. It's encouraging everyone to ask questions. It's a night of questions. Questions, when you ask questions, it means you're curious. It's a sign of adventure. I want to find something out. I want to discover something. It's a motivation to explore, to investigate. When you ask a question, you're indicating your desire to learn. The Seder is a night to ask questions. So wherever you'll be for the Seder, you're busy preparing, and as you're preparing, you're reading the Haggada, all of a sudden there are things that just jump out at you that you don't understand about the Seder night. Every year when I prepare my own preparation for the Seder, inevitably I discover things that I don't understand. I'm no different than anybody else. There's always something you don't understand. But then you begin, what you should do at the Seder, wherever you'll be, ask the question. Whoever's leading the Seder will should, and I'm sure will, welcome the questions. They may not have an answer, but they welcome it. When you ask questions, I'm telling you, you become engaged, as opposed to sitting there and, not going to say anything. The Seder is a time, don't be shy. Ask questions. Good, yeah.
It's Pesach, like the festival of questions.
So I think that's a good question. Why? In other words, what? I mean, we can ask questions on Rosh Hashanah as well. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with asking questions on any holiday, right? But why specifically the Seder? Because there's a mitzvah of Sipu Yitzias Mitzrayim. There are basically on the Seder night, according to everyone, there are 2 mitzvos in the Torah, positive mitzvahs in the Torah that we observe. Mitzvah d'oraisa. Number 1 is eating matzah. We have an obligation to eat matzah whether we like it or not. Short of a health problem, the doctor says you're not allowed out. You have to eat the matzah whether you like it or not. Number 2, you have to tell the story. But so how do you tell this? Again, we all know the story. What do we even have to tell the story? In order to really tell the story, that's why Chazal say ask questions. It's through the asking of questions that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that's a positive mitzvah, not only on the men, but on the women too. It's like matzah. Every mitzvah that a man is obligated at the Seder, a woman is obligated as well. And I say that because when I grew up, now there are so many conveniences, you get fancy paper plates and you can buy them. I remember my mother, may she rest in peace, was in the kitchen the whole time. She was busy preparing, getting everything for the meal and so on. And I remember when I started to learn about this, when I was a teenager, I said, Ma, what are you doing in the kitchen? You're supposed to be at the Seder and sit down. No, I have so much to do. She wanted to make sure everything ready for the meal. I had to encourage her. I said, this is what my rabbis told me. You have to sit down. So she finally agreed, and she came in and she sat down at the table. She just wanted to do because she felt, well, this is for the men. The women, they're in the kitchen preparing the meal, and so it's a mistake. It's a mistake. Women are just as obligated as men are. I mean, you can help, obviously, but today there's so many conveniences. There's no excuse. You have to be just as engaged as the men are, and ask the questions, and explore and investigate and fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. So that's number 6. Yeah.
I think it was number 4. Sorry,
Yeah.
go back to that. That we asked the question, like, why was it necessary for us to be in Egypt for so long? I think I might have just missed the answer to.
Well, number 4 was a night of destiny. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your question?
Why? So I think the question we were trying to answer was why was it necessary for us to be in Egypt for so long?
Yeah.
And I think I just missed the.
Well, and then what I was saying was that there are many reasons why what did we learn from the slavery experience? So one of them was to learn how to be an Eved Hashem, to learn to serve Hashem. You serve Paro, that's wrong. Okay. We're now going to transition from serving Paro to serving Hashem. The notion of, what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says a person is only free, al tikrei chorus elacheris. A person is only free, right, when they subject themselves to the mitzvahs of the Torah. Okay? Many people think freedom is doing whatever you want. So Rav Soloveitchik said, what do you mean doing whatever you want? In your biology, doesn't your biology require you to do certain things? You have to sleep, you have to eat, and all that. There are so many things that force us to behave in a certain way. What do you mean you're free? So freedom means when you subject yourself to a higher order, that releases you from some of the biological pushes and enables you to soar to a different level. You're not just an animal. You're not just a sophisticated animal. You follow? And maybe if we have, I don't want to, encroach upon the next person. If we have time, so that's number 6 was the night of questions. Number 7, it's the night of the child. So we already mentioned that the children occupy a pretty prominent place at the Seder. We have the Manashtana, and the Gemara comments and says that we have to give many of the customs that we do at the beginning of the Seder. Kadesh, we wash our hands without saying a bracha. Why? So the Gemara says, well, why are we doing that? And then we're, karpas, and we start the dipping. And there are many customs that before the Manashtana, they remove the dishes from the table. Now, we don't remove all the dishes from the table, but you're supposed to take the Seder plate and you're supposed to remove it from the table. So a child would say, what are you doing? We haven't eaten yet. How come you're clearing the table? I remember when I started to do that at the Seder, my kids, Dad, what are you doing? How come you're taking everything away? I started taking the dishes away with it. So the Gemara says that all that is kedei, okay, hekera litinokus. The Gemara uses that expression in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. So we want the children. So the children occupy a pretty important place at the Seder. So very often we make them into Rav Soloveitchik, we make a mistake. What do we think? Oh, the Seder is all about the kids, and you never say the Manish Tan, it's so cute, and which of course is all very important. But I said this on Monday, but there's a deeper idea that Rav Soloveitchik says. He says, what's the focus of, says, why are we focusing on the kids? We're focusing on the kids to tell us, adults, that we have to learn to discover the child within each of us. He makes a distinction between being childish and childlike. Can you hear the distinction? If I say that someone is childish, it's not a compliment. If I'm saying you're childish, I'm saying you're immature, you're babyish, you're spoiled, and so on. But if I say if I say to somebody you're childlike, what am I saying? Curious, pure, innocent, enthusiastic, like a kid, excited, emotional, enthusiastic. Very often, the older we get, we become been there, done that. We become jaded, too sophisticated, too rational, too intellectual. And we bury the child in us. And Rav Soloveitchik says, what a terrible mistake. Says, he quotes the Gemara, the Medrash, that says that there was a coin that Avraham minted. And on the coin of Avraham, on one side was a figure of an old person, and the other side, there was a figure of a child. What the Medrash says. Now, whether that actually happened or not, we don't know. But what was the idea? Avraham was saying, Avraham lived, right? He was 175 years old. So there's an advantage of being old, of having arichas yomim, you learn a lot and so on. But what happens when you get older? Well, the excitement, the enthusiasm of life is gone. The juice of living dries up. And you just, you wander through, you go from one day to the next, and so there's no excitement anymore. Just because you're 175 years old, right? Can you be a child? Absolutely. So Rav Soloveitchik says, why we focus on the child at the Seder? Yes, we want to give the children their due. But when you watch the children doing their thing, you know what you're supposed to think about? You and me. What about the child? My child? What about me? What about the child in me? Has it become too buried, too covered over? Where's my excitement? Where's my enthusiasm? Where's my curiosity? What happened to my innocence? What happened to me? So people think, well, I grew up. Yeah, you grew up. That's wonderful. But why does growing up mean you have to forfeit your child? You follow? That's why the Seder is the night of the child. They say, I mentioned this too, that one of the names for matzah in the Kabbalistic literature is called lechem de mehem nusa. It's called the bread of faith. What do you mean faith? Children believe. Children are wide-eyed. Of course, they believe in their parents. They trust their parents. Whatever mom says, whatever dad says, I'll do, and so on. Well, do we have that faith as well? That unconditional faith in Hashem? That's the faith of a child. So one of the extended meanings of matzah is that matzah is called in the Kabbalistic literature lechem de mehem nusa, which means the bread of faith. Okay, that's number 7. Number 8, it's a night of eating. Now, what do you mean night of eating? So, we have the Shulchan Aruch, we have the meal, which means, and basically consisting of matzah, which is a biblical command, and the maror, which today, in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, is only rabbinic, and we have the korach, we have the sandwich, right? So now the truth of the matter is, that's all you have to eat. Now I know typically, Seder meal, you have your chicken soup and matzo balls and filter fish and a nice big meal and chicken and dessert, but you don't have to have that. In fact, there are stories that sometimes when there is, according to one opinion, one should eat the afikomen by midnight. Yom Yerushalayim midnight. 2 weeks from tonight, it will be about 12:40. Well, that's plenty of time. So one story this is the story of Rav Soloveitchik's son-in-law, they were so involved in telling the story of Mitzrayim, they got so involved that they looked at the watch and it was 12 o'clock and they haven't eaten yet. Now so what did they do? So guess what they did? They washed, had matzah, had maror, had the sandwich, benched. That's it. In other words, that's all they had. You found, in other words, minimally. That's the meal. But there is a notion of a meal. A meal is a meal. When we think of a meal, we think, well, the religious part of the Seder, we tell the story and so on, and then after the meal, we'll continue with all the other parts. But the meal is like, time out. I'm infant. Rav Soloveitchik says, no. The meal is a religious experience. It's not time out we're going to eat. It's a night of eating. It's a night where our hashkafa, our Judaism says, eating can be an extension of a religious experience. According to Ramban, when the Jewish people received the Torah, at the end of Parshas Mishpat, it says, Vayochlu vayishtu, and they sat and ate. They just received the Torah, and they're sitting and having a meal. So Ramban says, yeah. Because if you eat for the right reason, and you celebrate for the right reason, you have Shabbos, you have Yom Tov, then the meal itself is an arena, it's a stage where you can elevate the act of eating into a service of God. You follow? So it's a night of eating. But what makes Pesach unique is you're eating and you're fulfilling a positive commandment in the Torah of eating matzah. No other night has that. On Shabbos you don't have it, Yom Tov you don't have it. No. Pesach, you fulfill a positive commandment. In eating, a biological function is a religious experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is it just like a Hummer that you're supposed to finish
So there are two opinions. Rav Soloveitchik felt that, and this seems to be what the Ramah says, that the Ashkenazi custom is that you should have the afikomen, by midnight. Now, there are those that there's a big discussion. Some people, will fudge on that a little bit, and they follow another opinion that says you can, and they'll and the Seder will go on all night. I mean, it's a controversy, but the standard view, that's not Rav Soloveitchik. The standard view is one should have the afikomen by midnight, and you could continue telling the story and so on, but finish the afikomen by midnight. It's not a chumrah, okay? It's not a chumrah. So that's number 8. Number 9. It is a night of praise and thanksgiving, which means that we thank Hashem. There's a notion of gratitude. We say Hallel. Now, how does that fit in? Remember I said before that the essence of the Haggada, they take 4 psukim, right? And then they elaborate on it, right? Where do these 4 psukim come from? They come from Parshas Kisavo, the end of Parshas Devarim. They come from the Parsha of Bikurim. Now, you know the story of Bikurim. The Jewish farmer would come with the Bikurim, and he would thank Hashem. And he would say, Arami Oved Avi. He would thank Hashem. So Rav Soloveitchik said, the reason why those 4 psukim were chosen, as opposed to picking excerpts from the book of Shemos, which would be the way to tell the story, was in order to emphasize and underscore that the central theme of the Seder is one of absolute gratitude to Hashem for what he did for us. That he took us and made us his special people. He redeemed us, everything that he did for us. Pesach is the first holiday of all the holidays of the year. All holidays are rooted. Every holiday is rooted in the holiday of Pesach. Every holiday, what do we say in the Kiddush? We remind God took us out of Egypt. Doesn't matter what the holiday is. It all begins with Pesach. And that's when we became a people. Kadosh Baruch Hu took us out. So we thank him. According to the Rush, remember there's many different reasons why we have three matzahs. Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, right? A Torah, Nevi'im, different reasons. Right? But the Rush says, we have three matzahs because when a Jew brought a korban toda, which we'll read about, not this Shabbos, but in Parshas Tzav. So the korban toda was brought with matzah. And the korban toda was brought for 4 different reasons. And all of those 4 reasons were different expressions of how Hashem saved us. So the Rosh says we have 3 matzahs to remind us of how grateful we should be to Hashem. So there are many things in the Seder that remind us that the Seder night is a night of praise and thanksgiving. Okay?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. The 3 matzahs?
Yeah, why we have it.
Oh, so they're different. One is Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, or Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, but the Rush, one of the great Rishonim, Rabbi Yehoshua, says that we have them because the 3 matzahs remind us of the thanksgiving offering that was brought to thank Hashem for saving us. So this is a reason for the 3 matzahs a lot of people aren't aware of. So that's number 9. Number 10, and finally, it's a night of watching and anticipation. If you think of after the meal, and we continue with the Seder, a lot of people, after the meal, they take a rest and they go to sleep and they don't get up, they just, you have to finish the Seder, okay? Now, what does the last part of the Seder consist of? We already told the story. So what's the last part of the Seder consist of? What are we doing in the last part of the Seder? Well, what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is we open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi. So what, right? So what is that? Why are we doing that? Why do we sing? We ask Hashem, he's going to rebuild the second temple. And then we have Echad Miodei and then the Haggada. What? Why? I mean, we have the meal, we bench, okay, good. We'll finish the Hallel. We'll drink the 4th glass of wine. Okay, let's go to sleep. I'm tired. It's late. But no. Why? Some people, even after the Haggada, they say Shir Hashirim, which is one of the, which is the Megillah. Why? So Rav Soloveitchik says because the Seder night is one of anticipation. It tells us to look forward to the future. Second part of the Seder is all about believing that we have something to look forward to. What do we have to look forward to? Eliyahu Hanavi. Mashiach is going to come. They'll be just like we were redeemed once. We would be redeemed. That's a critical part of our belief. Not only to believe in terms of what happened in the past, but a conviction, a real conviction that we believe that we have a future, and that future consists of a redemptive era called Mashiach, Mashiach. And that's what the last part of the Seder talks about. That's why we invite Eliyahu Hanavi. What is he doing there? Because he will be the forerunner of Mashiach. And that's what we talk, Yivnei Beiso B'Karo. All of a sudden we're talking about Hashem rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. And then the Haggada, which according to the Kabbalistic tradition, talks about even beyond Yemos HaMashiach, Olam Haba, and so on. All the various reasons for it. Wow. It's like there's no end. So the Seder elevates us to a point where we are already in an eschatological age, of Yemos HaMashiach. That's the experience of the Seder. So it ends on that climactic point, Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim, and so on, but notion of Mashiach. When you think about it, you take all these 10 aspects of the Seder together, it could create an unforgettable experience for you. Okay, we have just about 5 minutes. Any of you have any questions or comments about what I said? I hope this was helpful, give you some, just a framework. Anything, yeah.
Version of Mashiach coming from something, right?
So there is, right, so the question is, there is a tradition about, when Mashiach will come, there is a tradition that Mashiach will come at the Seder night, that's correct, there is a tradition like that, look, you never know, there are a lot of traditions about when Mashiach is going to come. You never, Rav Soloveitchik said when Mashiach comes, he's going to come when you least expect it. Now,
So we can't expect it.
because when the Jewish people, I mentioned this on Monday, one of the reasons that we have matzah, the Haggada says, because we were rushed out of Egypt, chipazon. And what do you mean rushed? We didn't know it was going to happen? And he says, no, we didn't know. The Seder night, when the Jewish people sat down, they didn't realize there was the Makas Bechoros. All of a sudden, Paro knocks on the door and says, get out, get out, get out. So Rav Soloveitchik says, you know what that's telling you? When Mashiach comes, when redemption comes, it could come like this, when you least expect it. All of a sudden, you're having a normal day, there's a knock on the door, and Mashiach is, what? What? I gotta get dressed. What?
Mashiach dresses.
Okay, ladies, have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, right? And